impact of voluntary student unionism on services, amenities and representation for Australian university students summary report, and some of the benefits were listed as streamlining and more efficient delivery of services to student needs, the opening up of the provision of services to a commercial model, consultation with students to determine what could be defined as essential services at a number of universities. There was no longer a student union. In other instances, a number of student groups had merged into one body. Some institutions commented that there'd been benefits from voluntary student unionism in terms of student representation, and in particular that representation was now from a much broader base. Yet the government is intent on forcing this policy onto all students. I note that the Greens are also calling for a more effective student advocacy. There is a campaign online called HeyGovernmentLeaveMyWalletAlone.com, where numerous blogs can be found in opposition to the reintroduction of the student services fees. One said, "No fees, no new tax on students, deferred or otherwise," being the pre-election promise of Labor. The Minister for Foreign Affairs said in interviews that an elected Labor government would not reverse the introduction of voluntary student unionism. The member for Perth said, "No, we won't. We've made it clear we will allow students to voluntarily organise themselves." And when asked if an elected Labor government would contemplate some sort of loan or deferred payment, the member for Perth said, "No, absolutely not. One thing I can absolutely rule out is that I am not considering a HEC-style arrangement, particularly a compulsory HEC-style arrangement." An excerpt from the comments on the website range, as I said earlier, the website I referred to, Leave My Wallet Alone, range from "I could barely support myself throughout the year," that eventually I had to skip lectures to pick up extra shifts at work, and now am expected to pay for services that I won't use. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very concerned with the disproportionate disadvantage students from regional areas face, those students whose parents both have to work to provide their children with tertiary education. Many students from regional areas also do not qualify for youth allowance from Centrelink. Growing numbers of students have to take a gap year, deferring their university studies to qualify for the independent rate of youth allowance, otherwise they're unable to afford to go to university. An article in the Courier Mail by Amanda Horswell on 7 November explained why Generation Y students are opting for a gap year before going to university. She writes that many gappers are being forced to take a year off work and save up the cash for their future studies. A survey of the class of 2007 Year 12s, undertaken by the state government, found that university deferrals rose from 7.1% in 2006 to 8.4% in 2008. With 52.4% of students working full-time and 38% working part-time. A quarter of deferrers blamed monetary reasons for their deferrals, and most of this group said they needed to work to finance further study. A further 8.5% said they were working so they could qualify for the youth allowance to help pay for part of their study and living allowances. What is not known is how many of these actually never return to take up their places and do not follow through on their tertiary education ambitions. Many in my electorate of Forest struggle to send their children to university now, even with students taking that gap year, working to qualify for the independent rate of youth allowance. Just three of my constituents who actually, that I'll quote, Mrs Collins of West Busselton, John Thompson and Dennis Frost, have contacted me recently because their children don't qualify for youth allowance. Mrs Collins' daughter lives in Perth and studies at TAFE. She's trying to qualify for the independent rate of youth allowance, but there are simply no jobs available for her at the moment. Mr Frost's son spent 7 months in Cambodia last year undertaking volunteer work, now wants to study but can't afford to move to Perth, and therefore his studies are on hold while he tries to find work. The problem is, as well, he will have to start from the beginning again and work the 18-month period, and his university studies will be deferred for a lot longer than he would have liked. Consideration should be given to waiving the qualification for independent youth allowance for those students who participate in an exchange program and are often out of Australia for that full year. However, the key issues on this bill remain and are concerning. Should the fees be compulsory? No. Will the fee be increased? Well, this may be the starting point, because the fees capped at a maximum of $250 are indexed. Where is the guarantee that the money will be spent by the university for services, and what administration will be applied? The bill has been scheduled for debate today, but it was referred to the Standing Committee reporting on the 10th of March. Mr Speaker, I remain opposed to the introduction of what will lead to compulsory student union fees. Thank you.